Before men built kingdoms, before the great wars of the Third Age, and long before the ring was destroyed, the elves had already shaped the history of Middle-earth. They were the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, immortal, ancient, beautiful, terrible, wise, and sometimes dangerously proud. Some ruled hidden kingdoms, some fought Balrogs, some challenged Morgoth himself, others carried the light of the Silmarils, resisted Sauron, or changed the fate of elves and men forever. But who were the most powerful elves in Tolkien's legendarium? Today, we will rank 10 of the greatest elves in the history of Arda, from the least powerful among these legends to the most extraordinary of them all. And to make this ranking as fair as possible, we will not measure only strength in battle. We will also consider wisdom, spiritual power, influence, leadership, magical ability, historical impact, and the scale of the enemies they faced. At number 10, we have Maedhros, eldest son of Fëanor and one of the most tragic figures among the Noldor. Maedhros was not simply a noble prince. He was a warrior, a ruler, a survivor, and one of the most important elven leaders during the First Age. After the theft of the Silmarils and the rebellion of the Noldor, he became one of the central figures in the long war against Morgoth. His strength was not only physical. Maedhros endured one of the most terrible torments in elven history. He was captured by Morgoth, chained by the wrists to the cliffs of Thingol, and left hanging there in suffering until Fingolfin rescued him. After losing his right hand, he learned to fight with his left and became even more feared in battle. That alone shows an almost unbelievable level of willpower. As a leader, Maedhros was also one of the few sons of Fëanor capable of strategy and restraint. He gave up the high kingship of the Noldor to Fingolfin in order to prevent further division among his people. Later, he organized the Union of Maedhros, one of the greatest attempts to unite the enemies of Morgoth. But Maedhros is placed at number 10 because his power was still marked by tragedy and failure. The Oath of Fëanor dragged him into ruin. His greatness was real, but he was never fully free from the curse that shaped his house. Still, among the elves of the First Age, Maedhros stands as one of the strongest, most resilient, and most important warriors of the Noldor. At number 9, we have Thingol, also called Thingol, king of Doriath and one of the most ancient elves in Middle-earth. Thingol was not just a ruler, he was one of the first great kings of the elves, and his presence belongs to a time so old that even many of the Noldor seem young beside him. He was one of the leaders of the Teleri during the Great Journey, and after remaining in Beleriand, he became the king of one of the most powerful and mysterious realms of the First Age. His power came from several sources. First, his age and authority. Thingol had seen the light of the two trees through Millian's connection and ruled with a majesty that few elves could match. Second, his kingdom was protected by the Girdle of Melian, a magical barrier created by his Maya queen. This made Doriath one of the safest and most difficult places to invade in all Beleriand. Thingol was also the father of Lúthien, which places his house at the center of some of the most important events in Tolkien's mythology. Through Lúthien, his bloodline would eventually connect with both elves and men, and ultimately with the line of Númenor and Aragorn himself. However, Thingol is not ranked higher because his power was more royal and spiritual than directly martial. He was mighty, ancient, and respected, but he did not achieve the same legendary feats of battle as Fingolfin, Fëanor, or Ecthelion. His pride also led him into danger, especially when the Silmaril entered Doriath. Still, as king, symbol, and ancient power, Thingol deserves a place among the greatest elves in Tolkien's world. At number 8, we have Elrond Half-Elven, one of the wisest and most influential figures of the Second and Third Ages. Elrond is often remembered as the Lord of Rivendell, but his importance goes far beyond that. He was the son of Eärendil and Elwing, descended from both elves and men, and connected to some of the most important bloodlines in the entire legendarium. Elrond's power was not based mainly on brute force. His strength was wisdom, healing, memory, leadership, and resistance against evil across thousands of years. He fought in the War of the Last Alliance, witnessed the defeat of Sauron at the end of the Second Age, and later preserved Rivendell as a sanctuary of knowledge, protection, and hope during the dark years of the Third Age. He also carried Vilya, the Ring of Air, one of the 3 elven rings. Through it, Rivendell became a place of preservation, healing, and spiritual strength. Elrond advised kings, protected the heirs of Isildur, raised Aragorn, and helped guide the events that led to the destruction of the One Ring. Elrond is ranked here because his influence was enormous, but his power was not usually expressed through direct combat or dramatic magical displays. He was not the kind of elf who challenged Morgoth in single combat or slew Balrogs in battle. His greatness was quieter, deeper, and more enduring. Elrond represents the power of wisdom across ages, and in Tolkien, that kind of power can shape history just as much as a sword. At number 7, we have Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor in Middle-earth. Gil-galad stands as one of the greatest elven rulers after the First Age, and one of the most important leaders in the resistance against Sauron. His reign belongs to the Second Age, a time when Sauron rose again, manipulated the elves of Eärendil, forged the One Ring, and tried to dominate Middle-earth. Gil-galad's power was both political and martial. He ruled with authority, commanded armies, and understood the danger of Sauron before many others did. Unlike those who were deceived by Annatar, Gil-galad distrusted Sauron's fair appearance and refused to treat him as a harmless bringer of gifts. That wisdom alone places him among the great leaders of the elves. His greatest moment came during the War of the Last Alliance, when elves and men united against Mordor. Alongside Elendil, Gil-galad led the armies that marched against Sauron. In the final confrontation, both Gil-galad and Elendil fought Sauron himself. They died in that struggle, but their sacrifice helped bring down the Dark Lord's physical form. That feat alone makes Gil-galad extraordinary. Very few beings in the history of Middle-earth ever faced Sauron directly and contributed to his defeat. However, he is not ranked higher because we know less about his personal abilities compared to figures like Fingolfin, Lúthien, or Fëanor. Still, as the last High King, as a warrior, and as one of the leaders who brought Sauron down, Gil-galad belongs among the most powerful elves in Tolkien's legendarium. At number 6, we have Glorfindel, one of the most remarkable elves in Tolkien's mythology. Glorfindel is famous not only because of his power, but because his story crosses ages in a way few characters do. In the First Age, he was a lord of Gondolin, one of the Hidden City's greatest warriors. During the fall of Gondolin, he faced a Balrog in single combat while protecting the survivors fleeing the city. The duel ended with both Glorfindel and the Balrog falling to their deaths. This alone places him among the greatest warriors of the elves. Balrogs were not ordinary monsters. They were fallen Maiar, spirits of fire and shadow, servants of Morgoth. For an elf to defeat one in direct combat was an almost unimaginable feat. But Glorfindel's story did not end there. After his death, he was restored and returned from the West, becoming a figure of immense spiritual power in the Third Age. When he appears in The Lord of the Rings, the Nazgûl fear him. In the unseen world, Frodo perceives him as a shining figure of great light. That detail matters, because it shows that Glorfindel's power was not only physical, but spiritual. He is ranked at number 6 because he combines heroic combat, sacrifice, resurrection, and sacred authority. He may not have ruled kingdoms or shaped history on the scale of Galadriel or Elrond, but in terms of personal power and spiritual presence, Glorfindel is one of the most impressive elves Tolkien ever wrote. At number 5, we have Eärendil, one of the most important figures in the entire history of Arda. Eärendil is difficult to rank because his power is not the same kind of power we see in warriors like Fingolfin or Fëanor. His greatness is cosmic, symbolic, and historical. He was born of both elven and human blood, the son of Tuor and Idril, and through him the fate of elves and men became deeply connected. Eärendil's greatest achievement was not winning a duel or ruling a kingdom, it was reaching Valinor. At the end of the First Age, when the war against Morgoth seemed hopeless, Eärendil sailed across the Forbidden Seas, carrying the Silmaril. He pleaded before the Valar on behalf of elves and men, and his mission helped bring about the War of Wrath, the greatest intervention against Morgoth. That alone makes him one of the most influential beings in Tolkien's mythology. Without Eärendil, Morgoth might have remained unconquered for far longer. But his role became even greater. He was set in the sky with the Silmaril, becoming the morning star, a sign of hope against darkness. Later, during the War of Wrath, he fought in the heavens and helped defeat Eärendil the Black, the greatest of the winged dragons. Eärendil is ranked at number 5 because his power goes beyond normal elven limits. He is a voyager, intercessor, starbearer, and dragon slayer. He may not be the strongest elf in personal combat, but his impact on the history of Arda is almost impossible to overstate. At number 4, we have Galadriel, one of the most powerful and enduring elves in Tolkien's legendarium. Galadriel was born in Valinor during the years of the trees, before the sun and moon. She saw the light of the two trees, belonged to the royal house of the Noldor, and was considered extraordinary even among the greatest of her people. Her power is complex. Galadriel was not simply a queen or a sorceress. She possessed immense wisdom, spiritual strength, perception, and resistance against darkness. She crossed into Middle-earth during the rebellion of the Noldor, survived the First Age, endured the Second Age, resisted Sauron, and remained a central power into the Third Age. As the Lady of Lothlorien, she wielded Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings. Through it, she preserved her realm as a place of beauty, memory, and resistance against the decay of time. Lothlorien was not just a forest. It was a sanctuary held against the shadow of Sauron by Galadriel's will. Her greatest moment in The Lord of the Rings is not a battle, but a temptation. When Frodo offers her the One Ring, Galadriel understands exactly what she could become with it. She sees the possibility of becoming a queen, beautiful and terrible, worshipped by all, and she refuses. That refusal is one of the strongest demonstrations of moral power in Tolkien's work. Galadriel is ranked at number 4 because she combines ancient lineage, wisdom, ring power, resistance, and spiritual authority. She may not have the same direct combat feats as Fingolfin, but in terms of long-term influence and inner strength, she is one of the greatest elves of all. Before reaching the top 3, we need to mention several elves who almost entered this ranking. Finrod Felagund deserves special recognition. He was wise, noble, and powerful in song and spirit. His confrontation with Sauron in Tol Ngor is one of the most important magical battles of the First Age, even though he was ultimately defeated. Turgon, king of Gondolin, also deserves mention as the ruler of one of the greatest hidden kingdoms of the elves. Ecthelion of the Fountain is another legendary warrior, famous for slaying Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, during the fall of Gondolin. Círdan the Shipwright, though less martial, was one of the oldest and wisest elves in Middle-earth, a keeper of memory and a guardian of the Grey Havens. Celeborn, Beleg Strongbow, Fingon, Idril, and others also deserve recognition. Each played an important role in the long history of the elves. Some were great warriors. Others were wise rulers, protectors, or figures of endurance. But the top 3 belongs to elves whose power reached an almost mythic level. One who defied Sauron through song and fate, one who wounded Morgoth in single combat, and one whose fire, genius, pride, and creation changed the destiny of the world. At number 3, we have Lúthien Tinuviel, perhaps the most extraordinary elf in all of Tolkien's mythology. Lúthien was the daughter of Thingol, king of Doriath, and Melian, a Maya. That already makes her unique. She was not only elven, she carried within her a spiritual inheritance greater than almost any other child of the Firstborn. Her power was not based on weapons or armies. Lúthien's strength was beauty, song, enchantment, courage, and spiritual authority. And yet, through those gifts, she accomplished what almost no warrior could have done. Alongside Beren, she entered the story of the Silmarils and faced powers far beyond the reach of ordinary elves. One of her greatest feats was confronting Sauron at Tol Ngor. Through her power and the aid of Huan, she defeated Sauron's servants and forced Sauron himself to abandon his tower. Later, she entered Angband, the fortress of Morgoth, the darkest place in the world. There, before Morgoth himself, she sang a song so powerful that the Dark Lord and his court fell into an enchanted sleep. that is almost beyond comparison. Lúthien did not defeat Morgoth with a sword, but she overcame him in a way no army had managed. Her actions allowed Beren to cut a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. Lúthien is ranked at number 3 because her power is unlike anyone else's. She is not the greatest warrior, but her spiritual and magical power reaches a level that even the greatest kings and fighters of the elves could not match. At number 2, we have Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor and perhaps the greatest warrior among all the elves. Fingolfin's life was defined by endurance, leadership, pride, grief, and unimaginable courage. After the Noldor left Valinor, Fingolfin led many of his people across the Helcaraxë, the grinding ice, one of the most brutal journeys ever endured by the elves. As High King, he became one of Morgoth's greatest enemies in Middle-earth. But his most legendary moment came after the Dagor Bragalash, when Morgoth's forces broke the siege of Angband and devastated the lands of the Noldor. Believing everything lost, Fingolfin rode alone to the gates of Angband and challenged Morgoth to single combat. This is one of the most powerful scenes Tolkien ever wrote. Morgoth was not merely a dark king, he was a fallen Vala, the original Dark Lord, the greatest evil in Arda, and yet Fingolfin faced him alone. During the duel, Fingolfin wounded Morgoth 7 times, and Morgoth carried those wounds forever. He also struck Morgoth's foot before dying, leaving the Dark Lord maimed. No other elf has a direct combat feat quite like this. Fingolfin did not win, but the fact that he could challenge Morgoth, wound him repeatedly, and force him to fear the fight is almost beyond belief. He is ranked at number 2 because in pure martial greatness, courage, and heroic power, Fingolfin may stand above every elf. Only one figure surpasses him in total impact, genius, and world-shaping influence. At number 1, we have Fëanor, the greatest and most dangerous of the Noldor. Fëanor was not simply a warrior, not simply a prince, and not simply a craftsman. He was a being of overwhelming fire, genius, pride, creativity, wrath, and power. Tolkien presents him as the most gifted of the children of Ilúvatar in mind and skill, and perhaps the most intense spirit ever born among the elves. His greatest creation was the Silmarils, the 3 jewels that preserve the light of the 2 trees of Valinor. No object made by the elves was greater. The Silmarils became the center of the entire tragedy of the First Age. Morgoth desired them, stole them, and set in motion wars, oaths, betrayals, and destinies that shaped the history of Arda. Fëanor's power was not limited to craft. He was a master of language, thought, leadership, and battle. His words could move the Noldor to rebellion. His presence could ignite an entire people. After Morgoth killed his father and stole the Silmarils, Fëanor led the rebellion of the Noldor, swore the terrible oath, and drove his people into exile. In battle, Fëanor was terrifying. After arriving in Middle-earth, he fought with such fury that even the forces of Morgoth could not easily stop him. He pressed too far ahead, was surrounded by Balrogs, and fought against them until he was mortally wounded. Fëanor is ranked number 1 because his influence is unmatched. His creations shaped the First Age. His oath cursed generations. His genius surpassed all other elves. His fire inspired greatness and catastrophe alike. Fingolfin may have been the greater warrior, Lúthien the greater enchantress, Galadriel the wiser survivor, but Fëanor changed the world more than any elf ever did. And so we reach the end of this ranking. The elves of Tolkien were never simple immortal beings. They were kings, warriors, craftsmen, singers, healers, rebels, guardians, and tragic figures whose choices shaped the fate of Middle-earth. Maedhros endured torment and led armies. Thingol ruled ancient Doriath. Elrond preserved wisdom across ages. Gil-galad fought Sauron himself. Glorfindel slew a Balrog and returned from death. Eärendil carried hope into the heavens. Galadriel resisted the temptation of the One Ring. Lúthien overcame Sauron and enchanted Morgoth. Fingolfin wounded the Dark Lord in single combat. And Fëanor, through his genius and pride, changed the destiny of the world. But power in Tolkien is never simple. Sometimes it is strength in battle. Sometimes it is wisdom. Sometimes it is resistance, sometimes it is creation, and sometimes, as with Fëanor, the greatest power can also become the greatest tragedy. If you enjoyed this ranking, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments if you agree with the top 3. Would you place Fingolfin above Fëanor? Should Lúthien be number 1? Would you move Galadriel higher? And what ranking would you like next? The most powerful Mire, the greatest villains, the strongest men, or the most powerful objects in Middle-earth?